Those disturbing images are from the evening of February 20th, 1939. The place? Not Nazi Germany. It was right here, literally. You're looking at New York's Madison Square Garden. On that cold winter night, the garden hosted a rally of over 20,000 people who celebrated both being a Nazi and an American. On that very same day, Adolf Hitler was finishing construction of his 6th concentration camp. The dichotomy of the two events is chilling. So think about that. This Nazi rally went largely forgotten by history. But again, as a reminder, it took place just before Germany began its siege of Europe. So let us take you back to 1939 to Madison Square Garden and show you the events of that fateful night. Take a look.
I pledge undivided allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots, I'm sure I do not come before you tonight as a complete stranger. You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail. We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it.
If you ask what we are actively fighting for under our charter, first, a social just white Gentile ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
Joining us now is the man who pieced together that powerful documentary, Academy Award nominee Marshall Curry. Marshall, it's nice to have you here with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
As you watch that, part of you thinks that you're watching one of the alternative history types of films that we see. What would have happened if Germany had won World War II? Right. And then you're brought back to the realization that this was indeed in Madison Square Garden in just slightly less than 3 years before we go to war with Germany, a war in which nearly 500,000 American soldiers are going to die. It's a fascinating story, but people don't know about it. How did you discover the story?
I actually had a friend who is writing a screenplay about 1939, takes place in 1939 in New York, and we were out to dinner and he mentioned this thing to me, and I said, no way, that definitely didn't happen. I would have heard about it for sure if there had been a rally in Madison Square Garden like that. And he said, go look it up. And I went home and started Googling around, and I realized not only had it happened, but that they had filmed it. And there were some short clips that were used in other historical documentaries, but most of them were, very brief. And I thought, where's the rest of this footage? And so I got a archival researcher who I know who does documentary research, and he just started tracking it down. And it was scattered. Some was in the National Archive, some was in UCLA's archive, other places, and gathered it together and sent it to me, and I watched it, and my jaw just dropped.
Yeah, but let me ask you about that. I mean, you've done some marvelous films, all sorts of different subject matters. When you saw this in its entirety, you say your jaw dropped. What were your first thoughts?
Well, I mean, the way that they combine the symbols of America and patriotism with a philosophy that is so un-American was really amazing to me. You've got George Washington with swastikas. You've got, children bringing American flags in the Pledge of Allegiance, and yet it's all in the service of a horrific philosophy. And it was kind of a cautionary tale about how demagogues have done this for a long time, and in my opinion, they're still doing it today.
Let's talk about some of the aspects of this, all right? And the existence of this group, this organization, and the fact that they could pack 20,000 people into Madison Square Garden. I thought the most haunting scene here, I mentioned this to you in the very end, when you see just the shadow of the raised Hitler salute up in the balcony, and you see what's playing out down on the floor in front of it. But I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the notion of Nazism had been embraced by many in America, by many over in Europe, especially in Great Britain. Talk about that a little bit and what this organization then was doing here in the U.S.
Well, I think, in America, we haven't talked about this story, and when hundreds of thousands of Americans began being killed by the Nazis and millions of non-Americans were killed, we decided to kind of rub this part of our history out of the books, but to be fair, I think the vast majority of Americans were repulsed by the Nazi philosophy. I mean, when this happened, there are some really interesting old New York Times articles that we actually have on the website for the film, which is anightatthegarden.com. And on the more information page, people can read some of the old newspaper clippings. But there was a lot of debate in New York about whether this group should be allowed to have their rally. Mayor LaGuardia, was very opposed to the group, but felt like, I think he called them the biggest conglomeration of international cooties ever gathered. Yeah. But he felt like we needed to shine a light that cooties were killed by light. And so we didn't want to take away people's First Amendment rights. We wanted to let them speak, but the idea that 20,000 people could gather here indicates that there were many, many thousands who didn't happen to come out that night. And we know Father Coughlin had a radio show that reached 30 million people, in which he spoke positively about Mussolini and Hitler and
Father Coughlin, you talked about Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was an early supporter of what he would talk about, what the Nazis were doing to resurrect their society there. And I was struck again by the marquee out front of the old Madison Square Garden. And here it announces a pro-American rally.
Right.
And then it says hockey and basketball afterwards.
Right.
And you think pro-American, and as you said, the symbols, you know, the raised hand salute, the heavy German accents that you're hearing there.
Well, and the group did have an overwhelmingly German culture to it. It was the German-American Bund was largely what this group was. They were Americans, but Americans largely of German extraction. And I think that is one of the big reasons that their philosophy didn't gain even more traction. And it should probably be a cautionary point to us today, because the neo-Nazis today and the sort of extreme right-wing anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic groups, they aren't so foolish as to have people with German accents leading their group.
And wearing the uniforms.
They don't look like Nazis. They look like Americans, and they even more skillfully, I think, wrap their philosophy in the rhetoric of patriotism and the rhetoric of America.
Let me ask you about the man who's shown coming up on the stage and then being swarmed and beaten and eventually dragged off the stage. Swarmed and beaten first by the people in uniform on the stage, and then pulled off the stage by the police. What did you learn about him?
He was a young plumber's assistant from Brooklyn. Isidore Greenbaum is his name. He's a Jewish guy who went down, who said that he did not plan to go on stage. It was not a plan. It was just something that spontaneously, he said he couldn't believe how horrible the things that were being set up on stage were, and he just had to run out and try to do something. So he was arrested that night for disturbing the peace, and the next day was charged, fined $25, I think. And it was interesting when the magistrate who sentenced him said to him, you realize that somebody could have been hurt by what you did up on that stage. He said, well, do you realize that my people could be hurt by the rhetoric that's coming out of that stage?
How prophetic,
and sure enough,
how prophetic was that?
At that point, it was, it had not fully gotten underway, but very soon, millions and millions of people would lose their lives.
Do we know anything more about him, about Greenbaum, and his life afterward?
I believe he joined the military. The Washington Post did an interesting follow-up just a couple days ago, based on our short piece, and we spoke to his grandson recently, who said that this moment had always been kind of a point of pride for him, that he had gotten up on stage and challenged that philosophy, even in a small way.
The notion of one voice challenging 20,000 voices.
Right.
Speaking of voices, in terms of the technique of this film, you chose to do this without any narration. Why was that?
Well, I'll tell you, that wasn't my first thought. I originally, when I gathered the footage, I assumed I would interview a historian or have narration to set it up. And I thought, well, I'll just cut some things together and have that be the first structure, and then decide where to insert these other pieces. And when I did my first edit and watched it through, I realized that there was a huge power in just letting people parachute into this event and witness it, as if they've kind of time traveled back and can see who these people are and see it for themselves.
It's just a powerful piece of filmmaking. And Marshall Curry, we appreciate your time. And well, thank you again for spending time.
Thank you.
You be well.